Imagine if the world was run by teenagers. Of course, those that are teenagers now will run the world one day. So the question for us is, what are we doing to prepare them for that task? How are our young people interacting with our democracy and our parliaments? So I'd like you to think about a young person in your life, perhaps someone in their teens. It could be your child, grandchild, niece or a nephew. Just think about that person for a moment. And I'd like you to imagine their hopes and dreams for the future. Not just the immediate future, like they want to sleep in and go viral on TikTok, but their dreams for a bigger future for themselves, the jobs they want to have, the families they want to bring up, the communities that they want to live in. And now I'd like for you to think about what changes we need to be making now to make those things possible for those young people. What laws and policies we need to be thinking about now to make that happen. And for the last one, I'd like you to think about someone who's in power right now, someone in our parliament or our government. Think of their face and what they look like. And when we think of that person in power right now, they don't look much like the young person we imagined. They look like us. And their hopes and priorities are different to the young people we imagine. And there's a disconnect between those two ideas. And this disconnect is having a real impact on the way that our young people think about our democracy, our parliaments, and their futures. And when people feel disconnected from public institutions like parliaments, they can turn to other places to express their political views. They can become vulnerable to misinformation and extremism, and they can experience social and economic exclusion that can lead to unemployment, lower standards of living, family violence, and loneliness. And when young people are disconnected from our parliaments and our democratic institutions, we lose the opportunity to hear from them about the ideas and strategies they have to solve the very complex set of challenges our society faces. We lose the chance to create the future that they dream of. And this is why we need connected parliaments. Parliaments where young people feel not only welcome to learn about what adults are doing, but feel empowered to take over. And so we have many great stories to tell about exceptional young people doing wonderful things in Australia, and our institutions are trying to connect in with these great young people. For example, here in South Australia, we have world-class school education programs run by our South Australian Parliament, run by one fantastic lady actually in our Parliament. And we have great efforts to do things like have internships and scholarships for certain young people to learn about parliaments or media or journalism. And these are really good things, and they're inspiring young people to learn about our democracy. But they remain far too conventional to spark the type of fundamental shift that needs to happen to empower our young people to change our democracy to fit their needs. We keep imagining our parliament and our politics with reference to the past. Older people, and by that I mean anyone over 25, we are out the front and we are setting the rules and we are in control and we are in the way. We need a more ambitious agenda, and we can learn a lot about what works from democracies that look a bit like ours, such as England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. That's where I've recently come back from, where 16-year-olds can vote, youth assemblies are formed through democratic local election, and young people can directly shape public policies and propose legislation in Parliament. in these places, there's a broad acceptance that policymakers and lawmakers and political leaders care about the voices of young people, and they are investing in listening to those voices inside and outside of formal institutions. For example, in Scotland, the Parliament no longer waits for young people to write submissions to parliamentary committee hearings or sign petitions, but it employs specialist engagement officers to work with disadvantaged communities to prioritise areas for change. It uses citizens' juries to help inform the work of Parliament on things like climate change and housing. In Wales, 16 and 17-year-olds can vote in elections, and 11-year-olds can run for election in the Welsh Youth Parliament, which works directly with MPs to develop legislation and policy agendas and to scrutinise government expenditure and conduct inquiries. In Wales, they have a Future Generations Commissioner with a legislative mandate to think about how decisions they're making will impact not just on young people, but on the people that haven't yet been born. It is a requirement that their government agencies factor in that thinking in their policy making, including things like building of roads or funding of healthcare and planning laws. When I was in London, I saw a group of young people take over a chamber in Westminster and conduct an inquiry on the cost of living and its impact on marginal people. They questioned ministers and a range of other different agencies. And as they were doing this work, they were armed with the Make Your Mark survey that attracted over 1 million responses from young people, that has become a manifesto for change because it can isolate electorate by electorate what the next generation of voters are expecting from their MP. And this is backed by a UK Children's Commissioner who's got compellable information gathering powers to get the information that young people need to be able to apply this scrutiny. In Ireland, I met the Speaker of their Parliament who told me about the day when he saw young people protesting outside for climate action. And after this had been happening on Fridays for a number of weeks, that Speaker invited those protesters into the Chamber of Parliament, where they have been working since then on a legislative agenda with the MPs. In Manchester, I heard how local youth councils are working with their regional authorities to give money directly to disadvantaged young people who are designing and implementing their own social inclusion strategies. This is no strings attached grants to young people to do what they know is going to work to peers that they live next to. I heard university unions successfully advocate for free public transport for their students. In each of these stories, the adults have learnt to listen rather than lead. The institutions have made space for young people to create their own conditions of change. By trusting young people with some power, they've generated trust back. They've been able to move beyond this teacher-student approach to including young people in our democratic discourse. They reject this dress-up and pretend model for things like youth parliament, and they know that youth advisory groups that are government-selected rarely go beyond the usual suspects. They recognise that without genuine political impact and influence, youth voices will struggle to be heard. And when I heard this, I thought, we have what it takes to do this here in Australia too. We have the conditions ready. And there's 5 things that I think we can do to help get closer to this kind of ideal. So the first step is for our generations, people like us, to activate our curiosity about young people. Let's work out what young people actually think rather than assuming they're Netflix addicts that spend their money on smashed avocado. Young people are political. They want to live in a safe, prosperous and more equal society. They care about taxation, foreign policy, energy policy. Their lives are dominated by this pessimistic vision of the future, and they are experiencing, many of them, lower standards of living than older people, despite studying and working harder than ever before. Yes, there are gaps in young people's knowledge of our democratic institutions that we can and must fill. But young people have rich insights into the nature of our society through their lived experience, and we must respect and value that knowledge too. I went into this thinking maybe digitalisation is the answer, but I have learnt that digitalisation will not work unless it comes with human-to-human accountability from those in power. Relationships of legitimacy and trust have to be there first before online can work. The second thing we need to do is relinquish control and create space for young people to create their own agenda. We need to think about allyship, not leadership. And we have to vigorously defend the laws and principles that protect young people when they want to express themselves in their own way. So this means protecting the right to peacefully protest, the right to free speech, the right to creative expression, and creating accessible public spaces. Humble classrooms are also ground for what I hope can be revolutionary change. We need to change the way we think about student representation in university and school settings. Students who feel isolated and excluded from school decision-making processes are silenced at the moment through models that lift up the students that are doing the best. We have to use our classrooms to model principled negotiation and power sharing, which is critical for all democracies. And this means we have to welcome students into the forums where big decisions are made in our schools and our universities, involve them in budgeting as well as setting the conditions for effective communication in the classroom. Instead of putting the most engaged student as the head of our Student Representation Council, we need to let the least engaged student run the classroom so we can experience rather than assume what learning is like from their end. The third thing, we need to recognise that unless young people have political, their views won't be taken seriously by political parties. Groups of youth advocates like Make It 16 want us to seriously consider lowering the voting age in Australia, and I think we should listen to these calls. When young people can vote, their political interests are taken seriously, but they need us to make that change happen. Established political parties will only advocate for young people to be given the right to vote if it will broaden their own voter base. The fourth thing, we must take responsibility for and address the intergenerational theft that has happened and is still happening on our watch. Every time we go for tough on crime over justice reinvestment, or choose fossil fuel subsidies over carbon targets, or give tax concessions to asset-rich landlords, we signal to young people that we are prepared to be selfish and reckless with what should be a precious and sacred gift of democratic governance. If we want young people to respect democratic institutions, we need to account for future generations in the exercise of our democratic power. And we need to think about letting young people select their own leaders and run for office at local and state and national levels, rather than the idea of appointing youth leaders that we find to fit the models of expression that we can handle. And finally, number 5, and the most important one, we need to open the door to our democratic institutions and then get out of the way. We need to create a space for young people to tell their stories and raise their voices and shape their democracy. As parents and teachers and educators, we're often blocking their view of the possible by constantly reminding them of the rules of our families and schools and governments have created to advance our interests. As public servants, corporates and not-for-profits, we can't help but repeatedly emphasise the complexities and processes and trade-offs that feature in our society and our economy. We assume that young people have to keep being reminded about the barriers that are standing in the way of change, but they already know those barriers exist. They feel the weight of those barriers every day. Instead, we need to open the door to democratic institutions like Parliament, both literally and metaphorically, through uncovering how they work, but then move out of the way so that young people can see a different horizon, one that looks good to them, and have the chance to tell us how they want to get there. Because after all, isn't that what our Parliament is for? And that's my challenge to you. What can you do today to open a door for young people to change a rule in their life? How can we lift them up, help them raise their voices, and let them know we believe in their capacity to run the world? Thank you.